at lunch of giving a speech, and he was that nervous. I mean, he was spilling water all over himself. Don Knotts made America laugh for 50 years, but his daughter Karen just revealed the truth. She was only 10 when she became his therapist. While he played the nervous guy on TV, at home, he had real panic attacks, real depression, real thoughts of ending it all. Karen had to talk him down from dark places no child should see. The man who won 5 Emmys couldn't get through a day without his daughter holding him together. This is what she kept secret. Don Knotts was born on July 24, 1924, but his arrival wasn't met with joy. It was a shock. His mother, Elsie, was already 40. His father was mentally unstable, and his 3 brothers were practically adults. The oldest was born in 1906. The closest in age to Don was born in 1910. That's a 14-year gap. He was the accidental child, as author Daniel Divise later put it. In truth, he was the baby no one was waiting for. And it showed. The family had just lost their farm. They had no money. His father couldn't work. His mother was renting rooms to college students to survive. Their house on University Avenue in Morgantown wasn't a home. It was a mess of strangers and sadness. And in the middle of it, Don had no bedroom. While others had beds and doors they could close, Don slept on a cot in the kitchen. Every night he fell asleep to clinking dishes, leftover food smells, and loud voices. There was no privacy, no quiet, no comfort. To go to the bathroom, he had to pass through the living room. That's where his father, Jesse, spent most of his time. Jesse was a broken man, an alcoholic with what some believe was schizophrenia. He was violent, unpredictable, and terrifying. He would shout, lash out. Sometimes he'd grab a knife. When Don was 30, his mother asked him, "Do you remember when you were a baby and your father held a knife to your throat?" He hadn't remembered. Maybe he had, and just buried it. But it wasn't just his father. His older brothers weren't much better. Willis and William Earl, nicknamed Shadow, were heavy drinkers. They teased him, mocked him, sometimes worse. They treated him more like a pest than a brother. And yet, Don still looked up to Shadow. Because despite everything, Shadow was funny. He could make people laugh, even in that house full of pain. Don saw that, and he wanted to be like him. For a little while, Shadow was the closest thing Don had to hope. Then, in 1941, Shadow died from a sudden asthma attack. Don was only a teenager. First, he lost his father in 1937, then the only brother he admired. The pain was too much, so he created someone to replace him, a ventriloquist dummy named Danny. It sounds strange, but that's how Don coped. He made up characters because the real one was unbearable. At school, he kept to himself. He was pale, sickly, always nervous, but he discovered something. When he acted out, when he made people laugh, they paid attention. They liked him for a few moments. He felt seen. That need for approval, for escape, never left him. It powered his comedy. It shaped the nervous, twitchy characters he would later become famous for. But it also ate at him. Behind the scenes, he battled deep anxiety and depression. His daughter, Karen, said she often had to act like his therapist. The trauma never really left. The home didn't help. After Jesse died, Elsie turned their house into a full-time boarding house. College boys came and went. His mother tried to enforce rules, tried to chase girls out of the rooms she rented. But it was chaos. Don still slept in the kitchen. His brothers still fought. There was no peace, no order, just survival. When Jesse died at 55, it lifted a huge weight from Don's shoulders. He could finally move through the house without fear. He could breathe. And for a while, he thrived. He made friends. He was even elected class president. But freedom came at a cost. With Jesse gone, money dried up completely. Elsie was now a widow, running a boarding house with 4 boys to feed and nothing in the bank. But Don found something that made him feel safe, a ventriloquist dummy named Danny. When he spoke through Danny, it was like his pain had a voice that wasn't his own. At just 12 years old, Don turned trauma into a skill. By the time he got to high school, Don wasn't just performing for fun. He was making real money. At Morgantown High School, between 1938 and 1942, he took his act on the road. Birthday parties, church socials, local clubs. He made $25 to $50 a show, which today would be around $400 to $800. That kind of money meant something during the tail end of the Great Depression. Families were struggling, but Don's talent helped his own family stay afloat. He performed 3 to 4 shows every weekend across Monongalia County. Newspapers even advertised his gigs. Don Knotts and Danny became a name people knew. Some booked him a year in advance. He was still just a teenager, but he was already running a small entertainment business. And that applause, it wasn't just noise, it was fuel. So after graduating in 1942, Don set his sights on New York City. He had $300 saved, a cardboard suitcase, and all the confidence in the world. He found a tiny room near Times Square for $8 a week and hit the pavement, knocking on doors at talent agencies, nightclubs, and theaters. But the big city didn't care about small-town stars. The war had changed entertainment. People wanted jazz, swing, and polished stage acts, then trilogism, not so much. Don lasted 3 weeks before his money ran out. He pawned Danny for cash and bought a bus ticket back home. He returned to Morgantown broke, heartbroken, and $50 in debt. It was his first taste of real failure, but it also gave him a clear view of what it would take to make it in the big leagues. That fall, Don enrolled at West Virginia University, planning to become a teacher. He majored in education and joined the Phi Sigma Kappa fraternity, but he never really put Danny away. He kept performing at campus events, slowly regaining his confidence. Then the draft age dropped. In early 1943, Don realized he could either wait to be called up or take control. He enlisted on March 15th, hoping to steer his own path. At Fort Hays, his file noted his talent for performance. That detail changed everything. After basic training at Camp Crowder, Missouri, Don wasn't just another soldier. His gift for comedy, timing, and morale building got noticed. The military didn't just need fighters, it needed entertainers. And this time, instead of rejection, Don found the first real opportunity that would shape his career. They called it Stars and Gripes. It wasn't just a catchy name, it was a comedy show in the middle of a war zone. Don Knotts wasn't firing bullets. He was telling jokes, doing ventriloquist routines, and ducking air raids in the middle of the Pacific. While most soldiers had rifles, he had a dummy named Danny Hooch, Matador. Together they performed for tired and terrified soldiers, sometimes right before Japanese bombing raids lit up the sky. One of his fellow performers, Al Checo, said the attacks came like clockwork, right before he sang his first song. Air raid sirens would scream mid-show, and the whole cast would dive into foxholes, only to climb out, dust off, and finish their act. It wasn't a one-time gig. They toured for months, playing everywhere, from aircraft carriers to remote islands. Sometimes 2,000 soldiers showed up. Other times, 10,000. Don's act with his dummy was a crowd favorite, but deep down, he hated that dummy. He had been dragging Danny around since junior high, but out there, surrounded by death and chaos, something shifted in him. One day, while unloading equipment, the suitcase carrying Danny vanished. When someone asked where it went, Knotts just shrugged and mumbled, "I don't know." That was a lie. Years later, he admitted it. He'd tossed the dummy into the Pacific, just walked to the edge of the boat and threw it overboard. "I got tired of playing the straight man to a piece of wood," he said. In one version, Knotts joked that he could hear the dummy screaming as the waves carried it away. In his autobiography, he softened the story, said he left it on a beach, but to his friends, he told the truth. Danny went overboard. That moment wasn't just the end of a puppet act. It was the birth of Don Knotts, the solo comedian. What most people don't know is how decorated he was for a guy who never touched a battlefield. He was drafted in 1943, even though he weighed only 100 pounds, technically 1 pound under the limit. He had to sign a waiver to serve. But by the time he left the Army in 1946, he had racked up a stack of medals. The World War II Victory Medal, the Philippine Liberation Medal, the Asiatic Pacific Campaign Medal with 4 Bronze Service Stars, each one for a different campaign. He'd served in places like New Guinea and the Philippines, where bombs weren't just a possibility, they were expected. And even though he was an entertainer, he wasn't just clowning around. He earned the Army Marksman Badge with the M1 carbine. He could shoot. He also received the American Campaign Medal, the Army Good Conduct Medal, and the Honorable Service Lapel Pin. His service number was 35-756-363. He served from June 21, 1943 to January 6, 1946. Almost 3 years of constant movement, rehearsals, bombings, and performances that kept morale alive for troops on the edge of breaking. When Don was first drafted at 19, his neighbors back in West Virginia joked that if someone like him was going off to fight, the country must be losing the war. But the Army saw something in him. After basic training at Fort Bliss, a telegram came down from Washington. He was ordered to Fort Meade to join the Army show. The top brass wanted his comedy more than his combat. By the time he left the service, he held the rank of Technician Grade 5. It was the Army's version of a corporal. Then, with the GI Bill, he went straight back to school and finished his theater degree at West Virginia University in 1948. He also had minors in speech and drama. At college, he joined Phi Sigma Kappa and Alpha Psi Omega, where he sharpened his comedy skills performing at parties and talent shows. Oddly enough, the university's radio station turned him down, saying his voice wasn't right for radio. That rejection would come back to look ridiculous. On December 27, 1947, just a few months before graduation, Don married a fellow student, Kay Metz. She was the daughter of a Baptist minister from Wheeling. After graduating in spring 1948, things weren't glamorous. Don took a job at a department store in Morgantown selling toys. Money was tight, but one day the man playing Santa Claus at the store pulled Don aside and said something simple but powerful: "Give New York another shot." That one sentence lit a fire. Don and Kay packed up and left for the big city with just $100 of it borrowed from Don's brother. New York didn't hand him success on a silver platter, but things began to happen. His first major break came on a radio show called Bobby Benson and the B-Bar B-Riders. Don played Windy Wales, a goofy, loud-mouthed sidekick inspired by old Western movie characters like Gabby Hayes. The show had already aired once in the 30s, but when it came back in 1949, Knott's character quickly became the most popular part of the program. The show ran until 1955 and outlasted other kid classics like Superman, Sky King, and Captain Midnight. It was Don's first steady paycheck in the business. He'd landed the job through a contact from the Army, Lanny Ross, a radio host he'd met during his service, who introduced him to a talent agent. And Windy Wales was more than a funny voice. It marked a shift in Don's career. He stopped performing with his ventriloquist dummy, which he had tossed into the Pacific during the war, and leaned fully into comedy. By the early 1950s, television was starting to take off. Don stepped into that world with a 2-year role on the CBS soap opera, Search for Tomorrow, from 1953 to 1955. It was his first time acting seriously on camera, and it gave him a steady paycheck and new experience. It also helped him work with some big future names: Lee Grant, Robert Loggia, and even Kevin Bacon would later pass through that show. One scene in 1953 was especially creative. Don played a man in a coma. The producers filmed him moving around beforehand, then superimposed that footage over the live broadcast to make a dream sequence. That kind of TV trick was rare for the time. Don's time on Search for Tomorrow didn't make him famous, but it built his reputation and taught him how to work in front of a camera. Then came the turning point. From 1956 to 1960, Don appeared on The Steve Allen Show, a nationally broadcast variety program. This was where he brought out his most famous creation, the nervous man. He'd perform fake interviews where he looked terrified, bug-eyed, shaking, completely out of place, yet claiming to be a surgeon, a demolition expert, or some other high-stakes job that obviously didn't fit. The contrast made audiences laugh hard, but the idea came from real life. Don once watched a guy give a nervous speech and found it hilarious. Later, he had a dream about a nervous character and wrote the rest of the act the moment he woke up. At first, not everyone got it. A Manhattan nightclub owner said the routine was boring, but when Don tested it on his fellow actors from the Broadway play No Time for Sergeants, they couldn't stop laughing. That told him he had something. Gary Moore gave him airtime, and then Steve Allen brought him on his primetime show. Audiences loved it. Overnight, Don Knotts went from being just another struggling comic to a household name. Don Knotts met Andy Griffith in 1955, and it changed both their lives forever. They were cast together in a Broadway play called No Time for Sergeants, which opened on October 20th at the Alvin Theater in New York. Their bond on stage carried over behind the scenes. They clicked immediately. Both were from small towns. Both had that easy Southern charm, and both had perfect timing when it came to comedy. When the play was turned into a film in 1958, Don Knotts made his big screen debut. The movie kept most of the Broadway cast, including Griffith. In February 1960, Don Knotts was playing bridge at a friend's house in Los Angeles. As they watched an episode of The Danny Thomas Show, Andy Griffith appeared as a small-town sheriff named Andy Taylor. Knotts saw something more. He picked up the phone and called Griffith. His pitch was simple. What if the sheriff had a deputy? A nervous, overconfident deputy to bounce off of. Knotts needed work. Griffith had a new opportunity. That call didn't just land Knotts a job. It gave birth to one of the most iconic characters in TV history, Barney Fife. This wasn't a random idea. Knotts and Griffith had worked together before in No Time for Sergeants, and their chemistry was already proven. Behind the scenes, executive producer Sheldon Leonard pretended to be undecided. He told Knotts he'd take it under advisement, but in reality, he already wanted him for the role. Knotts still had a few weeks left filming The Steve Allen Show, so Leonard played it cool. 3 weeks later, it was official. Barney Fife was in. Without that call, The Andy Griffith Show might have been just another forgotten sitcom. But there was one problem. Originally, Andy Griffith was supposed to be the funny one. Don Knotts, just the straight man. That was the plan going into the first episode, but by the second episode, everything changed. The moment Griffith saw Knotts in action during the manhunt, he knew the roles had to flip. In a 1993 interview, Griffith admitted, "I was supposed to be the comic, but when Don came on, I realized he should be funny, and I should play straight to him." That decision saved the show. Writers quickly rewrote the dynamic. The show now focused on the chaos caused by Barney's overconfidence and the calm problem-solving of Sheriff Taylor. Studio electricians even predicted the change would make the show a hit. One told Griffith, "You'll be in the top 10 in 6 months." He was right. The chemistry was gold, and audiences loved it. What came next was nothing short of domination. Don Knotts didn't just play a funny sidekick. He became the gold standard. From 1961 to 1967, He won 5 Emmy Awards for Outstanding Supporting Actor. The only gap came in 1964 and 1965, but he came back swinging. His competition? Hollywood giants like George C. Scott and Robert Redford. And still, Knotts won, again and again. Guinness World Records even listed it as the most Emmy wins by a lead actor playing the same role in the same series. His performance was so strong, the Museum of Broadcast Communications described Barney as both comic and tragic, self-important, overly romantic, always wrong, but never cruel. That combination made him unforgettable. But in 1965, everything took a turn. Knotts believed the show would end after 5 years. Griffith had said so multiple times. So, during the 5th season, Knotts started planning his future. He signed a 5-film deal with Universal Studios. He was ready to move on. Then came the twist. CBS convinced Griffith to continue the show for at least 3 more years. Knotts was stunned. Andy suddenly said he was going to stay on. He later recalled, "It was a tough time for me. I hated to leave." But he had already committed to the films. The timing couldn't be reversed. He had to go. That departure left a massive gap. Fans noticed it instantly. Many believed the show lost its creative spark once Knotts left. His chaotic, lovable energy had carried the show's humor. Without him, something was missing. Then came the real gut punch, the money truth. While Andy Griffith became rich through majority ownership of the show, Knotts earned just a regular actor's salary, around $1,250 per episode. That's about $35,000 a year. It wasn't peanuts back then, but compared to Griffith's cut, it was shockingly low. Knotts didn't have any ownership stake. His manager later admitted it was a terrible deal. After 5 years of making the show a hit and winning 5 Emmys, Knotts finally asked for more. Not half the show, just a small share. But Griffith misunderstood. He thought Knotts was asking for half of his stake. The misunderstanding ended their business partnership. When Don Knotts signed his first big movie contract in 1964, it felt like a dream. Lew Wasserman, the president of Universal Studios, offered him a 5-year deal. But it wasn't just a regular contract. It gave Don the power to choose his own projects and hire the writers he trusted most. He would star in at least 1 movie every year, fully backed by the studio. For a kid who grew up dreaming of motion pictures before television even existed, this was everything. But behind the excitement was frustration. CBS was paying Andy Griffith a massive $1 million a year to keep doing the Andy Griffith Show. They only offered Don $150,000. And when he played Barney Fife, earning Emmys and nationwide love, he made less than $100,000 a year. The Universal deal wasn't just good money, it felt like finally being seen. Don's first big movie with Universal, The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, made $4 million in 5 months. The budget had only been $500,000. That was a win, but not a blockbuster. The film did best in the Midwest and the South. In New York, most people hadn't even heard of it. Then came The Reluctant Astronaut in 1967. It only made $36.4 million adjusted for inflation and ranked 64th that year. His films kept making small profits, but not enough to excite Universal. By 1971, after How to Frame a Fig, the studio decided not to renew his contract. The box office simply didn't match his TV fame. Everything changed when Disney entered the picture. In 1975, they cast Don in The Apple Dumpling Gang alongside Tim Conway. It pulled in $36.8 million, so audiences loved them together. Conway played the slow-witted goof. Don was the anxious, clever one, though both were hilariously incompetent. The mix worked. Even the sequel in 1979 made $24.9 million. Disney saw what Universal didn't. Don did better as part of a team. He wasn't a solo lead. He was a scene stealer. Disney kept pairing him with Conway in movies like Gus, No Deposit, No Return, and Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. With the right partner, Don's awkward charm became comedy gold. But when they made him the star of his own variety show in 1970, it flopped hard. The Don Knotts Show tried to turn him into a musical comedy host. He wasn't that. He was a character actor, not a frontman. One sketch even made fun of the Titanic disaster. Viewers weren't laughing. That show ended after one season. It left Don shaken. He was already trying to move beyond his Barney Fife image, and this failure made it worse. But his comeback would come from a place he didn't expect. In 1979, Three's Company needed someone new. Norman Fell and Audra Lindley had just left. Someone suggested Don. Producers offered him the role of Mr. Furley without even asking for an audition. At first, Don was scared. He thought the cast was too young, too cool, and it was filmed in front of a live audience, something he'd never done. But when he stepped onto that stage, the audience gave him a standing ovation that lasted almost 10 minutes. That moment erased all doubt. Three's Company shot to number 2 in the ratings during his first season, the highest in the show's run. Don's new character was a mix of vanity, nervous energy, and ridiculous confidence. Younger fans who never saw The Andy Griffith Show fell in love with him all over again. From 1979 to 1984, Mr. Furley brought Don back into the spotlight. While his career had highs and lows, his personal life was even more complicated. He married his college sweetheart, Kay Metz, in 1947. She was a minister's daughter, and her father performed the ceremony. They had 2 kids, Thomas and Karen. But as Don's fame grew during the 60s, his marriage fell apart. The long hours on set and his growing anxiety pulled them apart. They divorced in 1964, after 17 years together. Don became a single father, raising Karen during one of the toughest periods in his life. He battled depression, hypochondria, and became dependent on anxiety meds. Karen was just 10 when her parents split, but she quickly found herself caring for her father emotionally. Don's panic attacks and low moods made parenting hard, but he still supported her dreams, even if he warned her against going into showbiz. He wasn't funny all the time. Sometimes he was just downright morose, but he was very supportive, and I wanted to be on The Andy Griffith Show. In 1974, he remarried. His second wife, Laura Lee Chukna, quietly stayed out of the public eye. But their marriage was rocked by Don's declining mental health. Around that time, he was diagnosed with macular degeneration, a progressive eye disease. He spiraled deeper into depression. Laura Lee said he lived like he had a bucket list, terrified of going blind. His constant fear of illness and obsession with symptoms left the marriage in pieces. They divorced in 1983. Years later, Karen started opening up about what life with Don had really been like. She described his emotional swings, his deep depression, and how he wrestled with trauma from childhood. She remembered how he'd get caught in a loop of dark thoughts. She often felt like she had to step in and keep him grounded. Even as a child, she sensed her dad might fall apart without her. Don was a man who made millions laugh, but couldn't escape his own sadness. Then came Frances Yarborough. She worked on his show, What a Country, in the late 80s, and helped him remember his lines. She was in her 20s. He was in his 60s. But they bonded quickly. They both came from chaotic families. Frances said Don was the most vulnerable man she ever met. Soon after meeting her, Don quit smoking. Just like that. They married in 2002. But Don made her keep his health problems a secret. Even from Andy Griffith. He still wanted to work, and he feared no one would hire a sick man. Don had always feared being sick. His hypochondria was no secret. But then his worst fear came true. At 57, he really was diagnosed with macular degeneration. His vision started failing. Eventually, he couldn't drive. He couldn't read. He could barely recognize faces. For someone who had always feared illness, this was a cruel twist. But he found perspective. He told the New York Times, "I bet a blind person would give his right arm to have the vision I have." Then came lung cancer. He didn't tell many people. He kept filming. He voiced a character in Disney's Chicken Little and made guest appearances on shows like That 70s Show. But his health kept slipping. He was hospitalized at Cedars-Sinai with pneumonia caused by the cancer. For a short while, he got better. That short burst of energy gave his family hope. Karen said he was still cracking jokes from his hospital bed. She had to leave the room to laugh without disturbing the mood. But the improvement didn't last. Don Knotts died on February 24, 2006, at 11:00 p.m. He was 81. Andy Griffith was by his side that night. He whispered to his old friend, "Breathe, Jess. You've got to make this. You've got to pull through." And for a moment, it looked like Don heard him. After his death, Don was buried at Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. His grave shows him in several famous roles. The inscription says, "He saw the poignancy in people's pride and pain and turned it into something hilarious and endearing." That was Don turning struggle into laughter. 10 years later, his hometown of Morgantown, West Virginia, raised a statue in his honor. It stands in front of the theater where he once performed as a young ventriloquist. The statue doesn't show Barney Fife. It shows Don Knotts, the man who lived through it all.